Hey, I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and today I want to talk about a really, really important issue, and it's the prevention of mental health issues, and in particular, depression. When we look at rates of depression around the world, we're talking hundreds of millions of people, and depending on the study you look at, what we can see is that rates of depression have really not gone down in the last decade, and may in particular have increased in our younger demographics, specifically younger girls. Now, this is problematic because I would say that the most important thing that we have as humans is our mental health. That is kind of the primary outcome that all of us should and need to be caring about a whole lot more. So, when it comes to mental health conditions, and in particular depression, the way we've set things up in the United States is that we largely ignore early symptoms and we wait until things get so bad that you go to the doctor and you wind up having to say, I'm screening positive for depression. What can be done? What can be done at that point is a combination of psychotherapy and pharmaceuticals. Now, we can talk about the relative efficacy of these things, in particular the pharmaceuticals, but I want to make a point that is that we absolutely need to have these therapies available for people, especially people in crisis. And if you or somebody you love is in a bad place for mental health, highly recommend that you go and seek professional health rather than trying to do this on your own. With this said, where we absolutely need more energy is on the preventive side, specifically prevention for depression. So in this video, we're going to talk about four evidence-based strategies that we should all be taking advantage of that have been shown to help prevent the development of depression and may actually help as an adjunct to other therapies in depression. So that's the point of this video. Let's jump into the meat of it. When we think about depression, when we think about mental health in general, usually there's been this idea that mental health issues exist within the mind and that the mind is somehow separate from the brain. The reality is that all mental health issues stem from changes in the brain, and that can be changes in brain wiring, it can be changes in brain structure. We often talk about things like neurotransmitters. So there's been a lot of buzz around serotonin, and yet we now know that serotonin is really not the driver of depression. We also understand that systems in the brain, like brain metabolism, the brain's immune system, are involved in how we think, how we act, and how we feel. And we're now appreciating that in the context of mental health issues, and I'll bring up depression here again, that issues with brain inflammation and brain metabolism may be significant drivers of these depressed states. So when we think about that in the context of what can be done to prevent depression from happening in the first place, again, this is a concept that most people are not talking about, prevention of depression. I think we need to think about what are the evidence-based strategies that have been shown to help prevent depression. And the first one that we're going to get into here is as simple as moving your body. Now, as a doctor, I have told people about the value of exercise for a long, long time. And the reasons I've done that have historically been that it's good for your cardiovascular system, or that it can help you to lose weight if you do it in conjunction with nutrition. But the reality is that exercise is actually one of the most powerful strategies we have for better brain health. Now, exercise may be the single most important intervention when it comes to helping prevent Alzheimer's disease. It may also help with Parkinson's disease. But as it relates to mental health, it turns out that regular exercise may help to prevent the development of depression. Now, that's really important because we don't generally talk about that. Why is it that exercise can help to prevent depression? Well, exercise acts on a number of pathways related to brain health. For example, exercise is the most potent upregulator of a molecule called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, that helps to support healthy neuroplasticity, which is the rewiring of our brain. And actually, BDNF levels tend to go down in depression. And it may be that by increasing BDNF levels in the context of exercise, we're actually helping our brain to improve our mood. So one of the reasons why exercise is so important for depression prevention may be through BDNF, but another reason is that exercise helps to decrease inflammation throughout the body. So in the aggregate, it decreases inflammation. In the short run, importantly, exercise increases inflammation. Cytokines like interleukin-6 go up acutely in the context of exercise, but in the long run, it helps to bring down inflammation. And this may be especially important in the brain because brain inflammation is now deemed one of the most important pathways in promoting depression. And inflammation in our bodies may predict higher risk of depression and higher risk for treatment-resistant depression. So this is actually a better explanation than some of what we've seen around serotonin, which is this inflammation pathway. So exercise at a moderate level, talk about some of the specifics of how much exercise you should get in a moment. Exercise as a moderate intervention can actually decrease inflammation, which is a good thing for the brain. In addition to this, exercise is kind of obviously one of the best things we can do for our metabolic health. And we've now understood that brain metabolism actually plays a significant role in a number of brain health outcomes. So, a lot of this research has been done around Alzheimer's disease. We know that as we age, our brains may have more trouble basically getting access to fuel in the form of glucose, and that this correlates also with Alzheimer's disease. So, age-related issues with glucose utilization in the brain, but also increased problems with glucose utilization in Alzheimer's disease. And this is one of the reasons why people are interested in such diets as the ketogenic diet, because it may provide additional fuel to a brain that can't get access to glucose. As it relates to depression, we know that metabolic diseases are associated with a much higher rate of developing depression. So, metabolic syndrome, as well as type 2 diabetes, are related to a much higher risk for developing depression. Exercise is an amazing way to improve metabolic health through a number of pathways related to how we use fuel in our body, insulin sensitivity, to how our fat cells are basically made up. So, for all of these reasons, exercise is a really, really important important intervention to help prevent depression. So, what does that mean as far as practical steps? Well, I've made the mistake many times in my career of telling people they need to exercise for 30 minutes, 5 days a week. The reality is, if you are somebody who does not exercise right now, that may not be a practical next step. A practical next step is to find something that you enjoy, that is easy, and that you can replicate most days of the week that moves your body. So that might be starting with stretching. It might be getting a standing desk for your office so that you're kind of not sitting down all day. And then considering even getting a treadmill. I actually have a treadmill that goes under my desk. It's cheap. You can buy it on Amazon. It helps you to walk while you're in the day doing your desk work. In addition, the basic stuff. So taking a walk around your neighborhood. You might get into lifting some weights. You could just get some light weights and have them in your house that you use while you're watching TV. You can also incorporate exercise into your day by going on coffee walks and potentially even taking meetings on the go while you're walking, which is an interesting strategy. One other strategy you might consider is setting a movement reminder. So this is just something where a couple times a day an alarm goes off and it tells you to get up, move your body, do some jumping jacks, do some stretches, do some lunges. It's really about breaking up the day with movement that is so important. So, strategy number one, to recap, to help prevent depression that is evidence-based, is to incorporate movement into your day. Specifically, getting some exercise may be a powerful way to decrease the odds of developing depression. Strategy number two is going to be nutrition, diet-based. So, at a very basic level, the food that we eat turns into our brain cells, both our neurons and our glial cells. But beyond this, the food that we eat changes how these cells function. It changes the health of these cells. And it's become very clear that certain patterns of diet are preventive of certain conditions, while other patterns of diet may actually increase risk for certain brain conditions. We usually talk about this in the context of something like heart disease. And for a long time, we've been hearing about trans fats and saturated fats being less healthy for us as it relates to our heart, polyunsaturated fats and other unsaturated fats being healthier for us as it relates to our heart. Well, it turns out that dietary consideration around the brain is equally, if not more important. So, what do we know about the best diet to help prevent depression? And is there data for this? Well, the best diet is a Mediterranean pattern diet or a MIND diet, which is a variant of the Mediterranean diet. And we do have good evidence here across a number of studies, meta-analyses, and individual studies that eating a diet more similar to the Mediterranean pattern diet can help to prevent a host of brain-related issues. Again, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, but as it relates to this conversation, this may be one of the best ways to prevent depression and depressed state. So, what is the Mediterranean pattern diet? It is variably defined, and different people have different perspectives on the specifics of what is so important about the Mediterranean pattern diet and why it does what it does in our bodies. But the bottom line here is the Mediterranean pattern diet is a diet that advocates for consumption of lots of diverse, minimally processed foods. So lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, olive oil. It's much lower on highly processed foods and red meat. So it's more seafood than red meat, perhaps a bit of poultry. The Mediterranean diet does advocate for it being okay to have a little bit of red wine. We could talk about that separately. I don't necessarily think that consuming alcohol is a good step for a brain if you're trying to do long-term prevention of brain issues. But again, generally a diet that maximizes the diverse amount of basically minimally processed foods, lots of plant-based foods, more seafood as opposed to red meat. And you can look this up online if you just Google Mediterranean pattern diet. You can see examples both of recipes and individual components of that diet. Why does the Mediterranean diet work to improve brain health? Well, again, it gets to some of these pathways we just discussed in the context of exercise. Mediterranean pattern diet is one that helps to decrease inflammation because it has components like dietary fiber, omega-3s, as well as polyphenols, all of which may act on the body's immune system as well as within the brain. The Mediterranean pattern diet is also good for our metabolic health, and it may act through a host of other pathways in our bodies, including through the gut-brain axis to support better brain health. Let's talk now about strategy number 3, which can be helpful in preventing depression. This one is simply to get better sleep. So that's an easier thing to say than to do for many people. We know that around a third of people have trouble with sleeping. We know that insomnia is a huge deal for people around the world. And I'll just acknowledge that some people at different stages in their lives, for example, those with small kids or those who are in jobs that have them working at night. I know personally when I was in residency and medical school, this was the case. Will have a really hard time having good quality, consistent sleep. But the bottom line to it is independent of those details. Quality sleep, regular sleep, is statistically significant as it relates to the correlation with better mental health. So, what can we do to help to improve the quality of our sleep? Some of the basic strategies are going to be to help to control the temperature and the volume of the noise in your room. How do you do that? Well, a good temperature is somewhere around lower than 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't have to be freezing. And a good way to help control the volume or basically decrease the noise in your room is to consider a white noise machine, potentially put in carpets, make sure your windows are closed if it's loud outside. And beyond this, you want to keep it dark in your bedroom. That's a practical step. For most people, that means decreasing the amount of lights that you have on in your room, and that includes blue light. So, on that note, you really don't want to be getting exposure to a ton of blue light right before bed. And I would say it's a consideration, not a necessarily 100% something you have to do, but having a TV in your bedroom is not a good idea. A more practical step for most people is simply not to have your cell phone in your bedroom. Don't charge your phone in your room. Don't have your phone in your bed before you go to sleep. Now, as it relates to other steps, things you can do throughout the day, cut out caffeine consumption in the afternoon. Don't drink alcohol before bed. Both of these things compromise the quality of your sleep. And perhaps most important for most people, if you are still having trouble sleeping, if you're taking all these over-the-counter sleep remedies, if you've tried prescriptions and it's still not working for you, I highly recommend you speak to a healthcare practitioner about being evaluated with a sleep study. Sleep apnea is a huge issue. Beyond that, there are other sleep issues like restless leg syndrome and narcolepsy that can compromise quality of sleep. And the good news is for many of these things, there are very high quality interventions that can dramatically improve quality of sleep. So with all of this said, I'd just like to recap this point. Low sleep quality correlates with worse brain health and higher risk for mental health conditions, including depression. Reasons here, again, speak to metabolic, immune, and other pathways throughout the brain. But one additional pathway I'd like to highlight here is that sleep helps with the wide scale wiring of the brain. That during sleep, there seems to be these high level benefits to neuroplasticity. And this may be damaged in depression. Specifically, neuroplasticity markers and neuroplasticity may be damaged in depression. So getting good sleep may actually be a wonderful way to help to reverse and basically speak to some of those processes. So that's number 3 is sleep. The last thing that we're going to talk about here today as an evidence-based strategy to help prevent depression and potentially to help with the management of depression is mindfulness and kind of de-stressing strategies. So this is a large topic. There's so much that can be said about different types of meditation and mindfulness. Bottom line here is that our lives have become increasingly mindless, meaning we spend our days scrolling on social media, consuming news, basically putting our thoughtfulness on pause. And what we know is that the opposite of this, mindful practice, is correlated with better brain health, better overall health, and lower risk for developing mental health disorders. When we look specifically at depression, there's an interesting study that was done basically looking at a bunch of papers on university students and finding that mindfulness-based interventions significantly predicted a lower risk for developing depression. So that's just one area of the research, but generally speaking, more mindful time, more kind of stress mitigation time, lower risk for depression. As I said, as we talked about sleep, you can't necessarily remove all the stress in your life. You can't necessarily solve for all the issues you might have with sleep, but you can take steps each day to incorporate more mindfulness, more kind of meditative practices in the day. And this may be efficacious in the prevention of depression. So, what are some of these practices? Well, again, there are a host of them. Some people like to engage in something like a loving kindness meditation. Other people like to just sit and pay attention to their breathing. Some people want it to be a little bit more active, so they do a mindful walk. They just go for a walk in their neighborhood or through a park and just pay attention to what's happening around them. Other people enjoy mindful eating. The bottom line here is, though, to find something that enables you to be kind of focused on the present moment. And it may not be easy. It may not be pleasant. You may find your thoughts are racing in the back of your head, that your to-do list pops up. This is why it's so important to actually engage in this process, because the more you do it, the more you'll kind of get a sense as to how your brain works and help to debug certain aspects of it. So engaging in a mindfulness practice for at least 10 minutes a day, I think is a practical step for everyone as it relates to their brain health. But again, it may be in particular relevant in the prevention of depression, as well as generally enhancing mental health. So again, these are 4 strategies that are evidence-based, science-backed strategies to help to prevent depression and may help people with existing mental health issues. I will say here, because we're talking about a potentially challenging topic, that all of us need to be thinking about how we can manage our mental health each day. What are the strategies that make sense to help prevent mental health diseases from occurring and to improve mental health before we ever develop a diagnosis? And with that said, if you or somebody you love is struggling with a significant mental health issue, this is not an alternative to going to seek professional medical help, because we know that that is incredibly important for people who are at a place where they really need that type of intervention. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching, for listening. I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter. This is the Get the Stuck Out podcast. And if you are interested to learn more about any of these topics, please make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter at austinperlmutter.com/newsletter, and you'll get tons and tons of access to content like this related to how to improve your brain health and how to improve your quality of life as a result. Thanks for watching.